Hi, how's it going? Colin Daniel here from riffninja.com. Good to see you today. I'm in the mood to answer a question from one of my students, Kim. The question is, can you explain modes? Well, the modes is a huge study, but let's get started with some basic modal information. What is a mode? A mode is part of the scale. It is a scale. They're all scales. We've got all these different combinations of scales. You can apply this to major and minor. I'm just going to start with the major diatonic scale. And just because that's traditional, once you get that, of course, you can apply it to anything you want. So a diatonic scale has 7 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 8th note is the octave, and this is the G major scale I'm going to use here. This is 2 octaves G major for the sake of being able to cover all our modes, right? All you're doing is you're using the same notes of the scale and starting on a different note. It depends on how much you know on your theory. I prefer to stay away from the old school approach to the modes. Again, some players will disagree with me and some will agree. I think it depends on how you relate to them and what your goal is in your playing. I say neither one is wrong or right. I prefer to relate it to the number system. We'll get to that in a minute. But basically in a scale we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You know, 8 is the octave, and that's my G major. G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and G, right? Okay, so the first mode, number 1 mode, goes from G to G. Now, we're not going to alter any of the notes, right? We're going to play the same notes, but now, for each note of the scale, we can start the scale on a different note, but it's still in that key. So, for example, you know, here's my G major. But I could still be in G major if I start on an A. You know, so here's the deal with that, and this is the part you have to understand. This is why they gave them Latin names, and this is why I relate to them in letter names and how they're assigned to the scale degree. So, for example, I know that 1 is major, 2 is minor. It's a minor sounding mode. 2 is what they call Dorian. 1 is what they call Ionian. So this is G Ionian, which is the basic diatonic major scale. That's the 1, the tonic one. Now the 2 is Dorian, right? And it's a minor based. It's a sad sounding scale, but it's not the most. It's not the saddest sounding. Some will say it's more mid-range. It's not so dark. It's more neutral. I disagree. It's still got some minor to it because it is based in a minor position. Again, that's up to you how you apply it. Because as long as it's getting the effect that you want. So here's the Dorian scale, A Dorian, which comes out of a G major scale starting on the 2. 1, you know, so it'll be A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, and A. And there's my octave. You know, so here's G major again. Now here's the Dorian, which I consider a minor bass scale. Now number 3, they call that Phrygian. So I start on the 3rd note, 1, 2, 3. Start on the B and a G, right? And I'll go B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B. And of course that's minor sounding because the 3 chord or the 3 position for the G major is minor, right? And it does have minor tendencies to it. It's fairly dark. We call that Phrygian. Phrygian, number 3. Number 4, G, A, B, C. C is the 4th note out of the G major, and this is called Lydian, and it's fairly bright. It's more major related. So C, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C, and that would be C Lydian, not to be confused with C Ionian, which is C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C. Remember, we're taking the notes out of the G major scale and starting on each of its notes, which creates these modes. So C is number 4. It's called Lydian, but I call it the 4, which is a major based, because we know that 1, 4, and 5 is major, and we know that 2, 3, and 6 are minor, right? That's the way I relate to it. Again, everybody's going to have their own opinion about how to approach that. As long as I'm making this clear, you can do it any way you want. And of course, you can relate this to the relative minor too, once you get this in the major. If some of this is going over your head, then it's too early for you to study the modes, and you better go back to your relative major and minor scales and study that first. Learn your diatonic and your pentatonic scales first and the interrelationship they have, and then go to this. Anyways, 4, which is for the key of G, and of course this applies to any key, right? Like if I move it up to A major, then my 4, Lydian, is D, right? And so it applies to whatever key we're in. So we're still in G, G, A, B, C. C we discovered was 4, and it's Lydian, right? C, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, and C. Very bright. Happy scale, right? And the same with the next one, the 5 scale. G, A, B, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. D is the 5 out of G, right? So you see, you can take this all out of one scale if you want. Of course, you can move them around. You can do that too. You can start each scale on a different position. But this is my way of introducing the modes. It's a much easier way to grab it if you just know the one scale and just to hear the sound of these scales in one octave. So this is considered Mixolydian, D. D is Mixolydian. That's the 5. And it's a major sounding scale, and it goes D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C, D. D major. It's definitely a major sounding. Mixolydian is definitely major sounding. It's bright. I think personally, if you ask me, the brightest sounding scale is Ionian, the number one scale. But in some of the books I've seen it written that Lydian is the brightest one, which is the number 4. I don't know. That's however you use it. That's a pretty moot argument in some ways. I would consider 1, 4, and 5 out of G major, or out of any major scale, would be the brighter colored, happier sounding scales, right? The 1, 4, and 5. And the 2, 3, and 6 will be darker sounding. And so we're on to number 6 now in G major, Aeolian. And that's dark. That's our natural minor scale, you know, from E. So here's an E. That's the E natural minor. Sure, you can play it wherever you want if you like. I'm just showing you how it fits into the scale. And then from there, you can just take those notes and move them around if you like. It doesn't really matter once you understand how they fit in. And so that's definitely a minor. You know, E Aeolian, which comes out of the G major scale. E Aeolian. See, I would relate to that in a different way. I would relate to the E Aeolian as a 6. And there's other ways I could relate to too, but I'm not going to get into the deep theory part right now because I think that's too much. First, get this sorted out. And if you've got more questions, of course, please, by all means, leave me with your questions. As you can see, so far we've covered 6 out of the 7 modes. We've got 1 note left, and that's the evil number 7 note. The seventh note out of the major scale is probably the note that we avoid the most. We avoid it in chord because technically in chord it's the diminished chord, but you know, in rock and pop and blues we don't use that chord very often unless you're leaning more towards the jazz blues. Then you'll use it more. But just straight up blues, you don't hear that very often, and rock blues, anything like that, you don't hear the diminished chord very often. They usually skirt their way around it with single notes or the substitution, which is minor. But for the modes, it's the 7. And, you know, start it wherever you want. I don't care. Like, I'll start it here on the F sharp, the octave above. You can start it here too. You know, F sharp, G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp. And it's very dark. It's the darkest of all the scales, really. It's extremely dark because it's diminished. And if you check the intervals compared to a regular F sharp scale, it's definitely a diminished scale. Very diminished. Very dark. Anywhere you like. So you can take those notes and move them wherever you want. And that's Locrian. That's the 7, the Locrian. And of course, then you're back to the octave. And hopefully you find this useful, and that it breaks some of the myths behind the modes. Really, all the modes is your options that you have in this scale. You have 7 different notes in a diatonic scale. The diatonic scale is our complete form of the scale. And each of those notes in the scale, you can start the scale from, and you can end it there too, because of course the beginning and the end note has an effect on how you perceive those notes. But technically, what we just played here, those 7 modes, are all still in the key of G major and can be used in the key of G major or otherwise, and that would be another discussion unto themselves. But start there. Again, thanks for your comments. It's what's making these lessons really interesting. Don't forget to subscribe, and you can communicate to me some more. I'm glad to hear from you. And if you're real serious about playing the guitar, you should come to the Riff Ninja Academy and check out my free trial offer at riffninja.com. And even if you're not, I hope this lesson was really informative. Take care, and we'll see you again.